Hello, everyone. Welcome to the ATBC webinar series in tropical ecology and conservation. My name is Natalia M. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Michigan, and I'm also the chair of the Student and Early Career Sciences Committee of ATBC. My co-host is Jen Broaden. Jen, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Jen Broaden, and I am an assistant professor at Wofford College and the co-chair of the Student and Early Career Scientist Committee at ATBC. Thank you so much for joining us today for our second webinar series of 2020. Today, our webinar is going to review key topics related to advancing careers in tropical biology and conservation, including discussions on work-life balance, effective funding strategies, and career opportunities beyond academia. We are incredibly fortunate to have Doctors Alysa Handelsman, Chris Baraloto, and Lina Valencia to share their diverse experiences and provide unique resources to help and support our ATBC members around the globe.
And if you have any questions for our speakers, there is a Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen where you can post your questions, and when the speakers are done with the talk, Jen and I will be reading all the questions during the Q&A session. You also have the option to select an anonymous when posting the question, and let me just remind you that this webinar will be recorded and posted on the ATBC website during the next few weeks. Jen, back to you.
Yep. So we will just give ourselves probably about one more minute just to make sure that everyone's on here, and then we'll go ahead and get started with our first speaker. And again, if you have questions, please feel free to put those in the Q&A at any point in time, and we will moderate them as we go, and then get to all of those when we go to our Q&A session. And we welcome all questions. We're really excited to hear from you. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and start in about 1 minute. Thank you all if you've just joined us. As a reminder, you are watching the second webinar in the 2020 series, ATBC webinar series. And this webinar today is hosted by the Student and Early Career Committee, also known as SEXY. And we have 3 great speakers for you today, all reviewing key topics related to advancing careers in tropical biology and conservation. So we will go ahead and get started now that it's officially 3 o'clock, and I'll just reiterate one more time. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please put those in the Q&A, and we look forward to getting to those questions at the end. So we'll go ahead and start with our first speaker today, Dr. Alysa Handelsman, who is an assistant professor of anthropology at Wofford College, who researches family and childhood dynamics in urban environments.
All right, well, thank you so much to ATBC, and especially to Jen and Natalia for inviting me to talk with you all today about work-life balance. My screen should be shared at this point. So I know that there are a lot of you all joining us, apparently from every continent except Antarctica, which is very exciting. So thanks for being here. And I hope that some of what I share today will be useful for you in your own trajectory in academia or whatever path you're considering. I know that some of you are graduate students and some are faculty members. I've been both, and the challenges that I've faced in balancing work and life have changed a lot from grad school through now. So I'm about to start my third year on the tenure track. And these changes have made the process of establishing some sort of work-life balance increasingly difficult. The work is different. My life is a lot different. I have a husband now, I have 2 kids. As a graduate student, I'd often try to balance things out by staying up late at night to read and to write. But bedtime and the importance of sleep has changed a lot for me, and I can't pull all-nighters anymore to finish a writing project. So just to say a little more about myself, to give you that background, I moved to Guayaquil, Ecuador in 2012 for my dissertation research, and I ended up living there for 6 years. As Jen said, I'm an anthropologist. My work is based in the shantytown neighborhoods of Guayaquil, and the book that I'm writing right now focuses on the ways in which Afro-Ecuadorian children understand race and racism. I finished my PhD at the University of Michigan in 2016, and just after defending my dissertation, literally 3 weeks after, my first daughter was born. And that first year with her, I spent at home before going on the job market. And then in 2018, I moved to Spartanburg to start my job at Wofford College. And working and sending my daughter to school while my husband was traveling back and forth between Guayaquil and South Carolina was a really huge transition, and I was very tired. I fell in love with my job quickly, and I ended my first year at Wofford feeling very successful as a teacher, but not really as a researcher, not really as a wife, as a partner, as a mom. So with the support of my university, I was able to join this summer writing boot camp that I'd also read would help with work-life balance, which I felt that I desperately needed. I had a long overdue book proposal, and I figured that this boot camp would help me get there and help me work away that regret that I felt when I wasn't able to do any writing about my research. And in my first year as a professor, I did 0 writing and 0 work related to my research. So the boot camp was run through the National Center for Faculty Diversity and Development, and it's called the Faculty Success Program. Everyone starts the program with a writing project that they want to tackle over the summer. So they have different sessions, but I was in the summer session. And it's a time not just to write, but to think about how to make writing a part of your everyday routine. So the program really pushes for this at least 30 minutes a day of writing. So it's how to balance that alongside your other goals and your other responsibilities. And I don't consider myself an expert on work-life balance. I am someone who has experience, like many of you, juggling a lot and fumbling a lot in the process. But I did pick up some really great tools through the Faculty Success Program that have given me a sense of control, which at the end of my first year as a professor, I was really lacking. So I'm going to talk to you about these steps today, and hopefully you'll find some tools that you can apply to your own day-to-day lives that will be helpful in establishing more balance. I actually felt really energized yesterday putting these PowerPoint slides together and kind of thinking through these steps again. I just had a baby at the end of May, so today, well, I guess yesterday sort of marks my own transition back into work mode. I believe that having a plan is really the key to attaining any sort of balance with work and life. And the first major step that I want to share with you all is the strategic plan, which is helpful to draft at the beginning of each semester or quarter or whatever structure your school or your job are based on. And while you draft a plan one semester at a time, a more effective plan really does rely on backwards design. So even though you may know that by the end of this coming semester, you want to submit 2 dissertation chapters to your advisor, for example, it's helpful to think about your short and your long-term goals and how this coming semester fits into those. So let's say that you want to graduate by the end of the summer. Maybe you'll figure out that, hey, instead of having 2 chapters by December, I really need to have 3 chapters by December. Or if you're up for tenure next year, you may need to speed up the submission of an article publication or a book contract. So after thinking through those sort of short and longer term goals, you can start to organize semester by semester or quarter by quarter. And I divide my plan into 3 segments. So I have writing, I have teaching, and I have a personal piece to it. And this division I think is really critical to the work-life balance, because if you only plan the writing components, you overlook family, you overlook fun. Not that writing isn't fun, but having these different components is important when you're drafting your plan. So your semester may be around 13 to 14 weeks, so you can map out each week. And I provided a couple of templates here that I've used. So there's one example, and there's another. And these templates aren't really anything special, so you could use an Excel sheet. You can do that however you like, but these are just 2 formats that I've used. And a year ago, my goal for my summer semester for this boot camp was to finish writing my book proposal and 2 book chapters. And my teaching goal was I was developing a new course, and I was doing prep work for this January semester that my university has. And my personal goal was that I was going to join a gym, and I was going to exercise regularly. I was going to have date nights, and I was going to have play dates for my kid. And I was going to socialize more with work colleagues. So I had these plans in place. And I went through the 13 weeks, and I plotted what I needed to do and to complete by the end of each week to stay on track. So every Sunday, I would pull out my strategic plan and kind of reflect on the previous week. So some things might need to get pushed or modified a bit for whatever reason. And I'd look at the coming week's plan, and then I'd plot out what I was going to do on what day. And this is what's called the weekly planning meeting. And doing this, having this weekly planning meeting really changed my life. So part of the chaos was that my husband and I, we weren't really in sync with our schedules, and every morning was just hectic trying to figure out, who was picking up our daughter from school, did we have any food in the refrigerator for dinner, who was supposed to make for lunch. It was a bad scene every morning. So Sunday became our day for our weekly planning meeting, and we'd sit down with our calendars and see, who's doing pickup, who's doing drop off. What night are we going to have a date? So we need to find a babysitter. We started doing a Friday night movie night with our daughter too. And having this meeting just really was a game changer. And the Faculty Success Program, when you're kind of mapping out your weeks, encourages, or actually requires, taking 2 days off completely from work each week. And something useful that one of the program mentors shared with me is that your 2 days off don't necessarily have to be Saturday and Sunday. These days might change every semester. So let's say that you're teaching or you're taking classes Monday, Wednesday, Friday. It may make sense for your days off to start, after your last class at 1 p.m. on Friday, and then your 48-hour period off might be from 1 p.m. Friday to 1 p.m. Sunday. If you teach Tuesday, Thursday, maybe your 2 days will be Sunday and Monday. It all kind of depends. The way my schedule worked last year, I taught Monday, Wednesday, Friday, was that I took off from Friday afternoon through Sunday afternoon. This coming year, I'm teaching Tuesday, Thursday for the first time, and I'm going to use Saturday and Sunday as my weekend days, because I feel like Monday and Friday with my daughter in school, I can be more productive doing my own work. So assessing and adjusting is a really critical piece to all of this planning because we have plans, but things happen. I remember when I started the program, I got really, really frustrated one week because I had my plan, and then my air conditioning broke at my house. My daughter got this 48-hour bug. I couldn't send her to school, to her summer camp. And I sort of broke down. And the Faculty Success Program puts us in these small groups of four people with a coach. And so I was kind of sharing this with my group, and my coach said, yeah, Alysa, you're not the only one who has challenges. And she said, shit happens. And all of us really are living through this right now with the pandemic. And we understand very well that unexpected and terrible things can happen and can reshape the plans that we have. They reshape our lives. But at the end of last summer, I had this rough draft of my proposal that I was able to complete through the boot camp. And I had one of my chapters, but I didn't get everything together and finalized to submit until March of this year, actually. So I was doing a lot of assessing and adjusting throughout the year as different things came up. And another thing is that as you assess and adjust, you also learn how to be more realistic at times about what a feasible goal is for the end of a 13 or 14-week period. So for me, I said, by the end of these 13 weeks, I'm going to get a proposal together. I'm going to get 2 chapters ready to submit. I'm going to have date nights and play dates and go out with my work colleagues and go to the gym. And that's okay. That was part of my own learning process to be a little more realistic about how I was setting goals. So again, you're finding even in your goal setting, kind of this need to balance between, setting realistic goals, but also rigorous ones at the same time. But going back to this whole shit happens piece, last year, with the assessing and adjusting was really, really challenging for me and obviously for all of us when COVID hit. But a month into my school year, I had these really, I had my plan in place and I found out that I was pregnant. And so I was feeling very ill for a little while in the mornings, which was the time that I'd kind of set aside for doing my writing. So that's something that I had to assess and to adjust. And then we start at Wofford, we start our semester in February, and the first week of classes, I had my new strategic plan ready to go for the new semester. And the first week of classes, a tornado hit our town and it literally hit in my backyard. So again, it's just these things that happen and you have to kind of roll with it and be okay with having to make changes. But what I can say is that the critical piece is that you have a plan. So if we just kind of keep going from one day to the next without a plan framing our experience, things can sort of become aimless and we end up cramming at the last minute and sacrificing that work-life balance. There's a daily check-in that's very helpful in which you ask yourself questions about your productivity for the day. And you can reflect on fun activities too. So you get to look ahead at your plans for the following day as well. So I put some of the questions that you can kind of ask on the PowerPoint slide just for your daily check-in. And this check-in is a way to hold yourself accountable. So you can mess up one day or 2 days or maybe 2 weeks, but doing the check-in really helps to keep you on track. And if you aren't reaching your goals, it really helps you to kind of dig into why. So what is happening that's kind of complicating your process? And one of these pieces is the resistance tracking. So as you dig in, you can see, what is it that's standing in your way? Is it something external, like a tornado hitting, touching down your backyard, or you get a flat tire that eats up 4 hours of your day? Or is it something internal, like some self-doubt that you're struggling with? And so from there, after you're identifying this resistance, you can come up with a plan. So if you're facing this internal resistance, for example, where is the self-doubt coming from? Do you have a boss who's really hard on you? Could you talk to this person? Could you talk to a colleague about it? Do you have a dissertation advisor who's kind of eating away at your confidence through the feedback that she's providing? Should you change advisors? Should you, schedule a time to have a conversation with your advisor? I know that for me, while writing my book, there's a lot of insecurity that can kind of pop up. So, questions of, have I read everything that I need to read to make this argument? Is my argument unique? Is this interesting? Will people care? And there's a lot of that kind of going through my process, and it's helpful to recognize it so that you don't let it block you from your writing or from whatever research or project that you're working on. So figuring out the resistance and how to address it is very important. And as I mentioned earlier, the Faculty Success Program puts you in these small groups. And after the program ended, my group stayed together, not with our coach, but the 4 of us, and checking in with them each week, either by phone or by email, has been a really helpful part of my own process in terms of kind of talking through my resistance. Your group can cheer you on. They can push you, to stop making excuses. They can give you some strategies to kind of work through a writing block. So finding a person, a check-in buddy or a group that you can be a part of could be a helpful piece for your process as well. Okay. Another thing that you can track is also your time. So you don't necessarily have to do this with every daily check-in, but maybe spend a week in which you think critically about how you're using your time each day. I found this exercise really powerful. I felt like I was spending too much time checking my email, being on my phone. So instead of going out with my friends, I was just chatting with them on my phone. And to make it change in terms of how I was spending my time, something I decided to do was, and this seems sort of small, but it makes a difference, I think. I just decided to leave my phone in my room when I got home and not look at it again until my daughter was asleep. I don't have to know exactly what my email says exactly when it's coming in. So doing that and kind of stepping away from my phone and everything it connected me to was really helpful. And when I was tracking my time, I also reflected on my job that first year and all of the extra time that I spent in office hours. So for the next year, a strategy that I had was instead of, sorry, I'm getting a message here. It might be, okay, sorry. I didn't know if I had run out of time or not. But I was thinking about my office hours, and instead of putting them into my syllabus, I decided to do them by appointment, and I created, every Sunday evening, I would create a sign-up sheet for that week. So after holding my weekly planning meeting, I would go through and say, okay, what are some moments during this week when I can hold my office hours? And I would create 10 and 15-minute slots. If students needed, some extra time, they could sign up for 2 of those slots. But during that first year, I would have office hours where a student would talk to me for an hour. And that was great. And I love my students and I love the advising part of my job, but it just wasn't something sustainable for me. And it wasn't allowing me to achieve any sort of work-life balance. So making that change was something that made a big difference in terms of finding a balance. And in terms of email, which is another thing that really ate away at my time, that first year, I decided to designate certain moments during the day where I would do email, and I would actually set a timer for 15 minutes to not go beyond that. So the last semester, it was 9 a.m., noon, and 8 p.m. And for the 8 p.m. one, I would give myself, if I needed to go into the 30 minutes, if there was just something really pressing I had to respond to or send out, then I would give myself that time. But making those changes was very helpful. And another thing that I learned was that I was spending too much time prepping my classes. And advice that I got from the NCFDD is never to start working on course prep when you have an open block of time. Because if you have 4 hours, you're going to spend the full 4 hours prepping your class, and you end up over preparing and not even designing as good of a class. So one of the mentors from NCFDD, she recommended using the hour before your class or the morning before your class to prep for it, because you have this set deadline when you do it that way. And I did implement the strategy this year. It's a lot of pressure sometimes, especially if it's a newer course, but it definitely helped me achieve a work-life balance, because I'd previously been working just too many hours late into the night and early into the mornings prepping my classes. So I made these important changes to my teaching, to my advising, and I was able to devote time to writing every day. I was able to watch the news in the evenings with my husband instead of replying to emails. So I was really able to establish more of a balance. But I will say that I don't think, and reflecting on my second year with the changes I made, I don't think that I was as good of a professor. I still did okay. I mean, my students learn, my students like my courses, but as an overachiever, not devoting all my time to my teaching, or not devoting my all, I guess it was tough for me, and it really highlighted that this work-life balance thing is a give and take. And I know longer term that if I don't write and I don't keep up my research, I won't be as good of a professor. So these changes that I've made, although I feel like I'm not putting as much into my teaching in the long run, I really am, because I'm dedicating time to the researcher side of me, and that's really going to allow me to be a better and more interesting teacher of anthropology. Let's see. There we go. So connected to time tracking is this question of self-care. So how many hours are you sleeping? 1 week of the faculty success boot camp, we had to sleep 8 hours every night. And we couldn't take electronic devices into our beds with us. So that was part of it. It's kind of asking questions of, are you eating right? Are you exercising? Are you doing the things that you feel like you need to do to feel healthy? Are you treating yourself? And treating yourself can look different. It could be that you wanted to get a haircut, a massage, a walk with a friend, a movie. You may treat yourself to something that you've never tried before. You might do a getaway weekend without kids, which I did for the first time this year. It was really nice. And connected to the self-care too is this idea of lowering your standards. So part of taking care of yourself sometimes involves saying no. So no, I can't join this committee. No, I can't attend this work event. And this is especially hard, maybe for graduate students if your advisor asks you to do something, or for untenured faculty, especially for women. There are about 5 things in the last month that I probably should have said no to, but I didn't. So it's a work in progress for sure. But pick a week in the coming month in which you focus on saying no to something. And it's really a powerful thing. And hopefully it's more liberating than guilt-inducing. In terms of lowering your standards, I remember that our coach gave this example of kind of always feeling the need when she was invited to a work event or to some sort of potluck, that she always felt the need to make the most amazing recipe. So for her, lowering her standards was just buying something pre-made at the supermarket. That's never been a problem for me. I think for me, an example this year was saying no to joining a committee. It was a really big deal. I was sort of anxious about it, but it was something positive in terms of the balance that I need for my own life. So another piece of the success program is picking a mentor. And this isn't someone assigned to you by your department. So this isn't your advisor. This is someone who you admire or someone who you think could guide you in a different way, maybe from what your dissertation advisor or your department chair are guiding you in. So I pick someone from my campus who has a really active research agenda and who designs courses that have community-based learning components, and just getting to sit down with her and hearing about her experiences, juggling kids, tenure, writing, travel for research, that was all very helpful. And in the process, you also end up having this new ally and a new person on your team as you navigate the tenure track. And for the person who you asked to be your mentor, it's very flattering for them as well. And another part that I found really interesting in terms of the mentoring network is finding people who you might meet at conferences and workshops and making a connection with them, and perhaps they could be readers of your work at some point. And this is something that I personally want to develop more. And there's a lot of insecurity in this segment too. Why would this person want to read my chapter, my article? But really the worst thing they can say is, no, I'm sorry, I don't have time, and you move on. But you may be really surprised by the responses that you get too, and you can build important relationships in this way. I organized a panel for a conference last year and ended up asking this really famous person in my field to be our discussant, and she said yes, and now she's someone I have a relationship with. So really, if you don't put yourself out there and you don't ask, you can miss out on potential relationships and potential collaborations that can be important learning and networking opportunities for you. Do I really want to do this? Is a very important question. And as you think about your strategic plan, that can be a moment to ask yourself, do I really want to do this? So what are your goals? Why are they your goals? Are you getting a PhD and applying to a tenure track job because you feel you have to, or because you truly love academia? Are you applying to an R1 because those are the expectations of your dissertation advisor, or because your personal goals are linked to that pathway? So really asking yourself this question is very critical, and it's connected to the writing your book with many chapters. So thinking about what the different chapters that are going to make your life, what are those different chapters? So let's say you're on the tenure track and you love teaching and you love research, but somewhere down the line, you envision yourself entering administration. Maybe you want to be a provost. So what will you do now to prepare for that? So maybe not today, but it's something to kind of have in mind as you move forward. Or maybe you're a graduate student and for part of your trajectory, you want to spend some time working in the nonprofit world, or you want to spend some time teaching at a university in another country. Maybe you want to set aside time for just parenting without working, waiting until your kids are 5. I don't know. So just kind of taking some time to figure out what the different chapters are that are going to make up your life and your experience. And this book with many chapters is part of the backwards planning as well. So you need to have a sense of where you're headed. You want to know why, and you want to make sure that it's your why as well. The way I interpret this segment is that work-life balance is a work in progress, and understanding and accepting that it's a give and take frames your process peacefully. So I really found peace through a lot of these strategies because I found control. I was no longer programmed to this survival mode. I had a plan, and that organization has really, really helped me find balance. And as I said at some point earlier, I mean, things happened in my life last year that really challenged my strategic plan. My pregnancy, the tornado, a bunch of other things, and of course, the coronavirus. So it's important to remember that the strategic plan is a living, breathing document. You're constantly assessing and adjusting. You want to maintain rigor and you want to hold yourself accountable, but you also need to give yourself a break because life calls for adjustments from time to time. And certainly the adjustments that we've had to make with COVID are quite different and challenging. As I think of my strategic plan for the coming semester, I don't even know if my daughter will be back in school next week. I change my mind on that every day. I've gotten feedback on what I submitted for my book, and I have a lot of revisions to make. But when I think of my writing and my research goals for this semester, I think that what may end up being more reasonable for me and having a work-life balance just with the realities that we're given now with COVID, maybe it'll just be, reading some key texts and taking some really good notes on those. But the important thing is, I have a long-term plan and vision for what I need to do. And if there are challenges and there are setbacks, which there always going to be, it may mean that, you have to kind of come off your course temporarily, but not permanently. All right, so I think I made it. I'm just out of time now. So I want to thank you all for listening, and I hope that you're able to apply some of these strategies and adapt them based on your own field, on your own career. I encourage you to take some time before your next phase, maybe your next semester, which might be starting any day now, to really ask yourself some of these questions about, what is your book of many chapters? How are you spending your time? How might you spend it differently? What are your goals? And not just, for your academic career, but what are your goals for your relationships, for your personal health and happiness? I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have during the Q&A. Thanks again, Jen and Natalia, for the invitation. And I hope that you're all able to find a balance during these trying times that can bring you some peace. So thank you all.
Natalia, your microphone is on mute.
Thank you, Lisa, for your talk and for those tips. I'll definitely implement them. And remember, if you have questions for Lisa, we will be reading them in the Q&A session, so you can post it in the Q&A icon on your Zoom screen. Now, I would like to introduce our second speaker, Dr. Chris Baraloto, Professor of Biological Sciences and Associate Director of the Institute of Environment at Florida International University, who researches tropical forest biodiversity and responses to global change. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you so much, Natalia. And a special thank you to Natalia and Jen for all the work you've done in putting these webinars together. It's so exciting for me to see the growth of ATBC, and particularly this sexy chapter ever since its inception back when I was a counselor a few years back. And I do want to call everyone's attention to all the great work that Aaron Kuprowitz did in setting this chapter up. It's touched so many people's lives and I think enhanced career trajectories. And I hope the little bit of information we provide today can continue to do so. So I also congratulate, as I learn a little bit more about the activities of this committee, everything you've done to put together resources, including these webinars, because I think you've accomplished a great deal. And I know a lot of young people are agreeing with me on this. So I join you today from the beautiful grounds of the Kampong, a botanic garden. That's one of the National Tropical Botanic Gardens properties, in addition to an amazing series of 9 properties in Hawaii. And I moved here about 5 years ago to lead a partnership that promotes tropical plant diversity and bridges an academic institution, FIU, together with an NGO, NTBG, and other governmental and non-governmental partners. And in this beautiful setting, our team works together to weave our research with education and outreach projects and programs in our communities. And we can leverage these partnerships and networks to actually fund the great work we do, including our research work. And I believe these are the points that really underline the message I would like to convey to everyone today. Notably that in these challenging times, we need 1, to work together, and 2, to extend perhaps our comfort zone into some non-traditional areas so that we can together garner the necessary resources to continue our great work. And so I'll share my screen here with you. And first of all, please anyone reach out if I can do anything for you to support anything that you need. I'm happy to do so. I'm at a point in my career where it's very important to me, and I also have a little bit more time to do so. So please don't hesitate to reach out. I want to start today by talking about the background in which we place this challenge to fundraise in contemporary times. And I'd say that it's challenging, but there's also some great promise to it. And I'll talk a little bit about that. And then a second part, I'll go into some key suggestions, which I group into 3 areas, and we'll go through these. And so when I talk to potential donors, I often put up a slide such as this, in which I'd say things that we as a group all know, that tropical biodiversity remains undescribed, and that uses of tropical species still remain unknown to these days. And in that context, we have accelerating threats, land use threats, climate threats. And I always talk about a paradox here that funding for research is decreasing and education centers are downsizing. And I think I want to turn this on its head today to suggest to all of us that maybe this tenet that funding is decreasing is not necessarily the truth. And I want to have an optimistic tone to this, particularly for all of us doing such great work, that the time is actually right for us to be able to fund this work. So is funding really more difficult to obtain right now? I show here a slide that only goes up to 2017. This was when the US National Science Foundation had these pre-proposals. And so there was a two-part proposal process for the years 2013 to 2017. But the red line shows the overall funding rate of full proposals. And what you see, there's some variation there, but it really has not changed so much. When people did pre-proposals, of course, everyone wanted to talk about the fact that the overall funding rate was so low. But actually for the full proposals, it was not so bad, and it hasn't changed since then. And in fact, if we look across at the entire directorate in the US NSF, we see that the funding rates are actually quite good. And in fact, if you compare this, I don't put data up for you today to challenge this, but in France and even with the ANR and even with the FAPESP, I don't know of any patterns really falling off in this. And importantly, in addition to this, in the US at least, the average award size has actually gone up. And so overall, we are investing in some of this great work. And I think it's really important to recognize that we do have a chance to get this work funded, especially for collaborative research. And another piece of really good news, I think, is if you look within the data of some of these merit review process reports, you find that younger people have actually a better funding rate than some more storied older researchers. And I think this speaks very well to this group, that you have opportunities. There are particular funding calls. In the NSF, you have the career grants, or if you're a graduate student, the Graduate Research Fellowship Program. In France, we have the ANR Jeune Chercheur. FAPESP has a young career grant and postdoc grants. And throughout the world, we see repeated investment in young researchers. So one of the messages is, don't be scared to take an opportunity. You might have to go several times into this process, but eventually you will be funded. The other piece of this message is that these traditional governmental foundations are not the only source we should be looking at. This is data from Philanthropic Foundation Center that shows actually that the trend through time in investment in environmental projects, and they group it with animals, but it's broken down on the second graph into biodiversity and climate change research, is relatively stable through time, even through recent years. And I think this is also a very important message to all of us, that we should not be scared to apply for this type of funding, and that the funding rates are still there. And they waver through time. I think the IPCC had a boost of interest, and hopefully the IPBES will have a boost of interest for biodiversity research as we move forward. And this is a little bit more recent data that's put out by Giving USA, which tracks philanthropic donations. And I would share with you as well, because here we actually see a trend of increase in terms of the giving that's done, even in the environmental sector, even over the past years where the political situation has been challenging. And to the right, there's a pie graph that shows you actually experts in the field of philanthropical advancement that are talking about what they think the trends are going to be moving out of 2020 into 2021. And as you see, about 2/3 of them are actually confident that there's going to be an expansion in opportunities. And some of these opportunities are very relevant to those of us doing work in tropical biology and conservation. And so with that as a context, I wanted to just paint out a few key suggestions. And again, we're a community here, and I think we should be exchanging within those suggestions. And these are just three that come to mind for me, and then we can have some questions as well in the breakout session. The first is to broaden your network. And when I originally agreed to do this, I had said to myself, well, you know, I can come up with a list of opportunities and make this resource available. Well, guess what? This great, sexy committee of ATBC has done an amazing job putting this together for you. This is from the chapter committee website. And if you click on these links, it's very comprehensive, it's updated regularly, and you have a wealth of opportunities available to you that you can pursue. And I think you need to take advantage of this, both to practice writing, to get the peer review back, and the more applications you put out, the more of a chance, of course, that you will get success. The other piece of this is to broaden your network in terms of the people you meet. And part of this now is social networking, and there are a wealth of groups where you can have peers to bounce ideas and proposals off of. But part of this as well is getting to know networks who eventually have contacts who might be interested in supporting the work that you do. And so getting involved in local organizations, volunteering is not only our civic responsibility, it's not only something that gives us personal satisfaction, but it also can be strategic because you get to know like-minded individuals, some of which have the potential to participate in the support of the great work that we do. As well, if you get very involved with some organizations, you might be able to serve on boards and fundraising committees and learn how these operations work. And I think this is very important, particularly for young researchers, to learn how this works so that they can take advantages of opportunities when they present themselves. A second point that's super important, and I think, again, that this chapter has done an excellent job, is to seize all these opportunities to write proposals and receive feedback, to work in these peer review groups, and to take advantage of all the great resources, particularly those provided by ATBC and this chapter, to improve your grant and paper writing. And I think we've all learned that the more that we correct and review other people's papers and proposals, the more insight we have into ways to improve our own. And so again, this is another case where we can both contribute to our community, but we're also going to garner important support for our own personal careers through that participation. And I think that's a very important message for us all. As well, with oral presentations, I think it's so important to have these communication opportunities, to seize all of these opportunities to present your research and to make it in a diverse breadth of form. I think working with local schools is so important because on the one hand, you're giving back to the community, but on the other hand, kids are so honest and they can be very harsh reviewers. And if you cannot convey the importance of what you do to elementary school children, then you need to question the way you're writing your grant proposals. I think as well, you need to be able to condense this information and boil it down. Practicing an elevator speech in which you only have a ride from 1st to 10th floor in an elevator with someone. And so you, in that 30 seconds, need to be able to present what it is that you do and why it's important. You know, if you submit a paper to science, they ask for a one-sentence summary, and many people complain, oh, I can't condense this into one sentence. But if you can't, then maybe you should be asking yourself, what is the important message? And expanding on that a little bit, working with your communications team or just in your peer groups to practice writing press releases on your work so that when a paper comes out and you want to put it on social media or even share it with groups that are out there that might cover it, you have an idea of what's important. What is an important quote you might put out there to suggest why this work is important? Into what context would you place it? And to understand that context, you need to read very broadly and learn how to relate your work to contemporary issues. And certainly these are a few examples: Manga Bay, the IUCN news site, National Geographic. There's a lot more out there. And I think now with the ability to access this from smaller screens, that we have a lot of opportunities to keep up to date. Keeping in mind, as Alysa reminds us, that we don't want to get in the wrong balance with the other important things in our life. And before I move on to this point, I just want to share with you that I think that this communication practice has real applications. We have an internship program here at the university and our center that was funded by a relationship that was developed in a kids' soccer match situation of parents getting to know one another. I have other colleagues and I myself have met people in airplanes. This is like an elevator speech who put you in contact. So you need to be able to take advantage of opportunities, not necessarily to oversell yourself, but to be prepared to speak about what you do and why it's important. And integral to all of this, I think, and perhaps the most important message, to persevere in the face of sometimes some rejections and a process that can be challenging as we're trying to balance these other issues in our life. And all of us have learned a lot about this in the past months. don't hesitate to remind yourself that what you do is amazing, it's urgent, and it's necessary. And as well, that we are so fortunate to have the opportunity to do what we do. I think one of the key features that resonates with people, no matter whom you might interact with, is if you are genuinely passionate about what you do and genuinely can convey that passion, everyone wants to support it. And so learn how to convey that passion, and also learn for your own personal satisfaction as you're balancing these difficult challenges, as Alysa mentioned, to congratulate yourself on the great work that you do. So I probably end a little bit early, but that's good because we'll have a little bit more time for questions. But I will encourage all of you, if I can help with anything, to please reach out. I put my email here. Sometimes you have to be perseverant and send multiple times, but I'll be happy to help anyone as much as I can. And please, once again, take advantage of the great resources of ATBC and this great committee under the great leadership of Natalia and Jen. Thank you much.
Thank you so much, Chris. That's really helpful and very motivating at the same time. So we are now down to our last speaker of the day, Dr. Lina Valencia, who is the Colombia Conservation Officer with Global Wildlife Conservation. And in this position, she actually works across entities, including NGOs and governmental organizations, to conserve biodiversity. So we'll switch to Lina so she can give you some tips and tricks on how things work outside of academia.
Thank you, Jen, and like Alysa and Chris, thank you both of you for inviting me. And I'm gonna share a little bit of my experience. I'm by no means an expert in how to get a job outside of academia, but I can tell you a little bit about what was my path, and I hope I can provide some insight into how the world works outside of academia and conservation. And at the end, you'll have my email, and I'll be happy to connect to anyone and provide any advice or insight that I can. So thanks again, and let me share my screen. Okay. And I put a lot of pictures because why not pictures for this presentation. So as Jen said, I'm the Colombia Conservation Officer at Global Wildlife Conservation, which is a US-based organization who has the mission to ensure we live in a thriving Earth. And in this position, I lead all the conservation projects in Colombia and the tropical Andes. And I felt that when I was planning this talk and when I was thinking about, okay, what good insight I could provide, I felt that a good starting point was to tell a little bit of who I am and how I end up being part of GWC. Because I think in conservation, every person has a very unique experience, and we all go through very winding patterns and paths through our career. So I felt that I would want to start that way, showing you how I did it or how I end up where I am, and then provided some feedback and learnings that I had throughout that journey. So as my title says, I was born and raised in Colombia, and I had the unique opportunity, like I think many of these called to on this webinar, to experience and to enjoy on a daily basis the amazing biodiversity of my country. And I was able to go in one day from, you know, the lowlands to the highlands, enjoy paramos, enjoy the Caribbean coast, the Pacific coast, the Amazon. And throughout my career as a biologist, I was able to see, I was able to see the biodiversity in my country, and that drove me to pursue a career in biology. You know, Colombia is the second most biodiverse country in the world. And we have we have an amazing and outstanding diversity of primates. And this slide is what led me to pursue a career in primatology. And my journey as a primatologist started with the fact that I fell in love with population genetics and conservation genetics during my undergrad. And I was fascinated by the evolutionary history of primates. So I decided to do my first research project looking at one of the 25 most endangered primate species in the world, the brown spider monkey, looking at the phylogeography and biogeography of the species. So I think I had one of the coolest experiences in undergrad because I was able to travel throughout the distribution of the species, collecting fecal samples for genetic analysis. And at the time I would go to the field and I was like, okay, I need my fecal sample because I need my DNA because I want to do these PCRs and amplify those genes because I really want to see what's happening with this primate. And then as I spent more and more time in the field, this is what I would see. I would realize that primates were living in highly human modified landscapes, and that cattle ranching, mining, dam creation, logging and pet trade were really big threats for these species, and what was the causes of why this primate was one of the 25 most endangered primates in the world. And at that time, I remember being like, you know, I like population genetics, I like molecular biology, but I need to do more than that because the species that I'm looking to study is gonna disappear in front of my eyes. So what's the point of that, right? I need to do more than that, and I need to ensure that I'm gonna ensure the survival of this species in the long run. So I decided to pursue a PhD in biological anthropology at UT Austin. And in my mind, this was 10 years ago, I was like, you know, I am really interested in understanding how primates survive in these human modified landscapes. And sweet deal, I'm gonna combine everything that I like. I like, you know, population genetics and molecular biology. I'm gonna do a lot of GIS analysis because I love spatial ecology and spatial analysis. And I'm gonna combine that with a human dimension. You know, I'm gonna involve humans in the equation because primates are living in those landscapes next to humans, and boom, I save primates and their habitats, and people are happy living in those landscapes. So I embark in one of the most challenging but most rewarding experiences of my life. And I think some of you are in that period right now of doing my PhD. And I was really interested in looking at how human modified fragmented landscapes impact how primates move, disperse, and how their gene flow, and how that affects gene flow, with the goal of identifying conservation strategies to save those species. And I was particularly interested in working with this endemic and endangered primate of Colombia, which is the silvery brown tamarin. So I go into my PhD, I take 2 years of classes, I do my qualifying exams, you know, what we all do. And then I start going into the field, and I start spending a lot of time trying to trap these individuals and collect DNA samples so I can start doing my dissertation, start doing what I like the most, which is looking at the population genetics of these species. And my first 3 years or 4 years of PhD involved being in the field and standardizing the methods to do to analyze the population structure of these primates and developing a next generation sequencing approach. So suddenly my PhD became extremely theoretical, and I was spending tons of hours in front of the computer coding and trying to design a method that could allow me to identify and study many thousands of DNA markers in the genome of this primate. And as I was going back and forth between, you know, UT Austin, nice lab, computer, AC, the next 2 months I'm back in the field, working with the primates, seeing the threats, and spending my every day in the forest, not just with the primates, but with the local communities living along those primates that became my family during a year that I was in the field, and that really taught me what the primate needed and the reason of why I was studying this primate, and sort of gave me back the passion to what I do in my PhD. I started thinking about myself, is my PhD really working to save this species? In other words, am I really working to mitigate the threats that this species is facing? So tamarins, like many primates, are endangered because of habitat loss and fragmentation. So after being many months in the field, I realized that I was starting to understand what were the threats, and I was starting to understand that I needed to mitigate the threats, that my PhD and my research and my everyday work was not getting me there. I was just standardizing and publishing cool papers about a method of how to look at genomic data on an endangered primate, but nothing beyond that. And I started thinking, you know, if cattle ranching or the cow or you know, agro-industrial practices are the problem, and that means that the people are the problem, can they be the solution? And can they be the key partner into saving this species? So I came back to Austin on my 4th year of grad school after spending a year in the field, you know, sharing experiences with the local community, really thinking what I wanted to do with my life, with like 2 main questions that were just bugging me every day. And I was like, am I really a conservation scientist, or am I a conservation practitioner? Do I want to be one or the other? Can I do both? And most importantly, I started thinking about my research, and I started thinking whether the conservation needs were driving my research, or whether my research was driving my conservation, the conservation actions needed for the species. So it's my 4th year of PhD, and I'm starting to reconsider how I do research, which I guess it's a really, that's why your PhD is for. But it also, it was a point in my life that I was like, wait a minute, what I have been doing research is not what I am starting to believe it's how I should do research. So I started to realize that my research should be into understanding what are the threats that primates or, you know, this species is facing, so that I can decide interventions that can mitigate those threats, and then use more research to monitor how those interventions are working. Are they, you know, are they helping save the species or not, so that I can evaluate and do this loop all over again. So I came back to Austin and I was like, oh God, what next? You know, like I realized that the PhD that I'm doing, I like it, I'm passionate about it, but I don't know if it's what I really want to do. Should I finish? Should I quit? You know, is it worth it what I'm doing? You know, I have all these, and I have an NSF grant and I have all these grants. Am I wasting time and effort doing a lot of lab work and coding and not really doing much for the species? You know, I came back and I was like, oh my God, what should I do? And what should I do? And I think for anyone who is doing their PhD right now, that's a horrible thought, because you're like, you know, I'm on my 4th year, I have all my samples, I just need to write down this dissertation and be done, but do I have the momentum to do so, or should I just invest my time and efforts dedicating my life to save this species? So this slide basically was my anxious state during my 4th year of PhD, where I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. So I started thinking, you know, what can I do next and where to start? So I started thinking about, okay, you know, I realized that primates and biodiversity, it's in a crisis, and in order to save these species, we need to meet complex demands, you know, socioeconomical, poverty alleviation, food security. There's a lot of socioeconomical factors that are driving the conservation issues that you're doing and the environmental crises that we're facing. You know, it's not biodiversity loss, it's climate change. Now we see COVID and pandemias. And I was like, you know, I think I'm a committed individual. I have all the passion. What do I need to do that? You know, how can I make a life out of it? And how can I be a part of that movement? You know, because I joined my PhD and I think I had a trajectory of what I wanted to do. And then I realized that that's not what I wanted. And then inevitably you start thinking, how can I make a living out of this? I need a salary, you know, I cannot breathe out of air. So, you know, what are my options, or what are my paths available, and what should I do? And all around, should I finish my PhD or not? So at the time I decided, yeah, let's finish the PhD. You're still driven by your research. You still like what you're doing, even though it has become very theoretical. So let's do that, but let's do something more, you know, like go from the theory to the practice and go from the planning to the action. So I started doing, parallel to my PhD research, a community-based conservation program that combined my passions, which were conservation research and education, into saving that species, but not doing it from a theoretical point of view, but working with the community and creating those partnerships and alliances, not only with the communities where the species lives and which ultimately are going to ensure the conservation in the long term of the species, but also with other nonprofit organizations, with environmental, with zoos, with local government authorities, and started thinking, how could I go more than the theory? So I started to apply to grants, research grants that were not just, conservation grants that also had a component of capacity building, right? Because I knew what I wanted to do, but I felt like I didn't know how to do it. I felt like I knew about conservation. I had learned amazing things from the community. I became very attuned to what were the needs of the species, but I needed a little bit more besides just the funds to do it. So I started applying to a lot of fellowships and to a lot of research programs that provided not just the funds, but the capacity to turn me into the conservation practitioner that I wanted. And I highly recommend, especially CLP, but any of these fellowships and grants are amazing if you want to start doing a conservation project. And I started thinking about how can I work with the community to save the species. And I started looking at the conservation issue, not just from the monkeys' perspective. So, yeah, habitat loss, habitat degradation, logging, all these things are bad, but also from the community perspective. So for the communities, what is important for them? What's really in stake for them? What are the attitudes and behavior towards the primates, and how we work together to save the species? And I think this was a 2-year project. And I worked with the community to build identity and pride in the primates. We start building campaigns about using this species as a flagship for the community, because there's a lot of tourism in the area. So, raising awareness that it's an endemic species, that if you visit this area for tourism, it's a home where you're only gonna see this species. And we also started working, and I say we because I had a team working with me, with cattle ranchers, identifying how we could have sustainable cattle ranching practices in their farms that could benefit primates, the species in generally, although there's other 5 species in this distribution, but also benefit the cattle practices that they had, the cattle ranching practices. So this was great. This experience really realized that, my passion is there. I would like to combine education with research, with communication for conservation. But where am I going next? Is academia where I want to be, or because academia as I know it, and I came from a very theoretical background and a lab that there was not much of conservation being done. I kept asking myself, where can I find myself? Where can I do my passion and do what I like and still be paid for it and feel like I'm doing something and I'm helping the work when it's needed? And academia at that point didn't seem the place for me to be. So I started to see how I can make a living out of this. And this is kind of where I'm gonna go into what I learned in the process. And I think as a conservationist, now I have 6 years of experience in conservation, I realize, and I think if you talk to any person who's doing actual conservation, is that most of the time conservation skills are not taught in the classroom. Conservation is a multi-interdisciplinary field that sometimes is really possible to define what is conservation. Like people tend to say conservation biology, but that's just, again, a theoretical approach to conservation, because in conservation we have lawyers, anthropologists, sociologists, communication experts, biologists, geologists. So there's not a degree called conservation. So I started thinking, okay, how can I try and get those experiences elsewhere, and where can I get that vocational training? Because conservation is about many things beyond just, reading articles, which is what you normally, or what I was getting in my university and in my training as a PhD student. So if you're trying to find your career outside academia, I would say start looking for those experiences elsewhere. So try to, if you want to go through conservation, or if you want to go through communication, or if you want to go through education, try to find those, try to create your, either gear your research that way, or try to find those experiences elsewhere, either through internships or trying to create partnerships and collaborations with other researchers, or with people outside academia or within academia that are just doing different things. And they sometimes might sound challenging and overwhelming because you have to finish a dissertation, you have to fundraise, you have to teach. So not everybody has the chance to go into an internship because there's just simply no time. And as we heard earlier, we want to have that work and life balance, but try to get out of your comfort zone. Another thing that I did was that I took classes in other departments. I took classes I'm in anthropology, so I would of course take classes in biology, but I started taking classes in architecture, in sociology, in communications. And again, it takes time. So it was not only like formal classes, but I started attending webinars, reading books, watching documentaries, try to take online courses, just to try to think outside the box and to try to figure out, if academia is not my place, and if research as I know it is not what I want, what can I do to get what I want? Because to be honest, when I realized that academia was not my place and conservation is what I wanted, conservation is a huge field, and I really didn't know where in conservation I wanted to see myself. I knew I wanted to keep working with these species and saving these species, but also my personal life was in the US where my husband is. So life gets tricky. So you have to start thinking, where can I find my passion and my goal in life and still help the world how I think should be helped. I also started looking and attending conferences in conservation and other disciplines. So I'm a primatologist by training. So I used to attend the animal behavior conferences, the primatological conferences, the zoology conferences. And during my last couple of years, I started branching out and I attended the International Conservation Conference in Biology. This one is a little bit pricey and it rotates throughout the world, so it's not always easy to go to Malaysia. It's expensive. So this one is not that easy, but there's also the Student Conference in Conservation Biology, and I highly, highly recommend this conference. It's hosted in New York in the American Museum of Natural History every year, and it's hosted for early career professionals and students, undergrad, masters, or PhDs, that are seeking a career in conservation. So it's a super friendly, are seeking a career in conservation and are new to the field. So it's small conference, is super, super friendly. It's such a nice environment of friends and colleagues. And the conference provides you a lot of spaces for networking and for mentoring. So one of the things I have been to this conference twice as a student, and then I went as a mentor, is that you have lunch breaks with people in the field that are giving you advice. So sort of these webinars, but you have those encounters one-on-one, which we hope to have soon as COVID. We'll see what happens with COVID, but this webinar, you could have it one-on-one with people. And it's people like you who are either starting, who want to get into the career, or also super senior people that went through the same career path of you. So I highly recommend this conference to try to see where do you want to be, if either academia is not where you want to be, or if you want to do something different inside academia. I never did, but I attended, but I suggest geography, anthropology, sociology, different kinds of conference that take you outside of your comfort zone, because at least in my experience and what I have seen, PhDs tend to be an isolating process. So you end up just being by yourself writing, or by yourself coding, or by yourself reading articles, and you tend to forget what's the world around you. And sometimes you tend to forget why you're here in the first place. The best advice that someone gave me and that I'm giving you right now is talk to others in conservation, or talk to others in those fields outside academia that you want to pursue. I start doing things like going to the website of big NGOs, small NGOs, grassroots organizations, government organizations, multilateral organizations like the United Nations, the Inter-American Development Bank, the World Bank, and start seeing what's outside academia, what kind of projects they have and what kind of profiles the team members have, because that also gives you an idea of where you can see yourself. This was not fun, but I also spent some time doing that because it was recommended by people, is to spend some time in LinkedIn and see not just who are the people in the jobs that you want to like, but what has been their career path. And that's what I like about LinkedIn, because as I said at the beginning, in my experience, people that end up in conservation had really weird career paths. Like no one, I think, or few people are like, yeah, I want to do in conservation and that's why I'm going to get a degree in this and do do that. You know, and we think that having formal interviews, this is hard and you have to persevere, as Chris said, email people multiple times, because it's not that people don't want to talk, it's that they're busy. But having formal interviews and coffee with people at different levels within organizations that are doing the job that you might think you want. So have people at an entry level that just finished undergrad or grad school and it's working at a small NGO, to a senior person who is the director of conservation, and try to get a sense of how they end where they are and how they did it, and get a sense of what is conservation. Because conservation is a very big field. And in my experience, it took me a while to find my niche, my passion, and also how that was related to what the world needed. You know, conservation is a field in crisis, as many people say, and it's multidisciplinary. And within conservation, you can do many things. You can do in the programmatic side, that's where I do, where you are implementing projects, but you can also be in the fundraising side of things, in the communication side of things, in the education, policy, exploration, photography. Conservation is a beautiful field that has a space for everybody. And it's just a matter of time, in my experience, to find exactly what is your niche. And wrapping up, because I think I'm running out of time, another advice that people gave me and that I found extremely useful is that we tend to believe that if we're in academia and we're doing a PhD is because we're only being trained to do research. And that's so not true. And academia, in my experience, prepares you to whatever life will take you, you know, even if it's inside or outside academia. And the first step you need to do is to identify what are those skills that you learn in academia during your PhD or during your early years as a professor, and how can you transfer those skills to any other field or any other type of work. You know, I think everybody in doing a PhD or doing an undergrad or doing a master's have developed critical thinking, adaptive management. We're all great at problem solving, as working in teams. We're all, I think in a PhD and in grad school, we're good at working by ourselves, but also working with people in our labs. As Chris said, we are all experts in fundraising or become experts at fundraising and at budgeting how we spend money. We're good at communications. We're good at conflict resolution. And all those skills are going to be useful in and outside of academia. And we tend to undersell ourselves and think, you know, oh, I only know how to do PCRs and look at the population genetic history of a species. And that's not true. To do that, you had to develop a bunch of skills that are going to be useful regardless of where you ended. And then something that really helped me was to go to my university's career center. I don't know if all the universities have that. I think a lot of them have them, where they teach you how to go from a CV to a cover letter, how to create a LinkedIn profile, how to write an email, how to connect to other people. There's also a lot of websites, and feel free to take a picture or I can share these, of many places where there's not only career job offerings, but there's a lot of advice into how to get careers in conservation, as well as a lot of amazing networks of conservationists in different stages on their life that join these to get the support, the communication and learning exchange, and the capacity building necessary to thrive in conservation. And I just put a bunch, 4 of them, but there's a lot. And as Chris was saying, it's really hard and it's not fun, but you have to put yourself out and network, because as you network, you are being mentored and you are mentors for others, and and some others are mentoring you. As a woman in conservation, I am pointing out to these networks, but in general, network and put yourself out, email people, because in my experience, 90% of the people will end up replying your email or will end up wanting to have a coffee with you. They might be busy and you might have to email them 2 or 3 times because, we all have many things to do. But in my experience, so many people were so willing to meet with me for 30 minutes and tell me, Lina, this is how I got here. This is how I did it. This is the advice that I'm giving you. And that, at least for me, was very enlightening into, I can make this career switch. There's a space for me in the conservation world, and I do have the skills. It's not that PhD just trained me to do a career in academia, but I do have that. And yeah, again, it's not easy. Networking is not fun. Having an elevator speech it's not easy, but it's getting to know others is what I think it's successful for you as an individual to see what the world has to offer. And finally, it's not possible for everybody, but something that really worked for me and was the result of all these things that I just said is that one day I met the CEO of Global Wildlife Conservation in a seminar that UT did, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna talk to the guy and I'm telling him I want to be in conservation. Can I talk to you? And this is exactly what I did. I braced myself. I took a big breath, and I walked to Wes Secrets, who is my actual boss, and I was like, Wes, I love what your organization is doing. I'm finishing my PhD. I want to do more applied stuff. Can I talk to you and get to know what you're doing, and how can I work with you? And that led to a coffee, and that coffee led to a relationship that then led me to an internship, and then led me to my actual job. If I had not taken the courage to talk to him, which was not easy, I would not be in this job. And I wouldn't be doing the amazing work that GWC and I do in my position. So put yourselves out there, and rejections are gonna happen, but someone is gonna say yes, and rejections are good because they help you figure out what you want, what you don't want, and what you have to do. So couple of bullet points to finish. I think I am a scientist and a practitioner, and conservation now drives my research, not the opposite. And I think my biggest thing that I learned and that I want to show you or tell you is that career paths are really, really dynamic. And so we have to be open to new ideas, and we have to be open to what life throws you. And I think the first talk showed us as you never know what happens. Shit happens, and you just have to adjust your career to what those things happen and to the experiences that you're getting every day. And it's okay to change plans. Accepting that I didn't want it to be in academia was really hard for me, because that's what I thought I wanted to do for many years. I thought I wanted to be an assistant professor, tenure track position, all that stuff. And then I realized that it wasn't. And now I think I'm in a great place of my life where I still have my passion for what I'm doing. And it's okay to change plans, even though it's terrifying sometimes. And lastly, network, make friends, and get out of your comfort zone, because I think those 3 are the key to not just to get a job outside of academia, but just in general to find happiness and passion in what you do. And I'm here, leave my email free. Feel free to email me. I hope my advice and my experience have helped. And if not, I'm happy to put you in contact with many people that I know are willing to talk to you and teach you what, or enlightening to what was their career.
Thank you so much, Lina. That was awesome. Thank you so much to all of our speakers, Alysa Handelsman, Chris Baraloto, and Lina Valencia. All of their email addresses have just been sent to you in the chat. So please feel free to reach out to any of them if you have questions regarding anything that they have talked to you about. They will be more than happy to provide some more feedback. So now we will move on to the Q&A. There's one thing I want to mention that did pop up as a question. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted to the ATB website before the end of the month. So if you've had an internet connection problem, or if you just missed it, or if you want to share it with someone else who you think may find it helpful, please go ahead and check out the ATB website. So our first question is for Alysa. And it was actually, she responded in the chat, but just in case it didn't get there. Alysa, I will go ahead and ask you this question, and you can just respond, and then we'll hold off on your other questions for a little bit. So this person wanted to know, Alysa, is your tenure committee taking into account personal issues and evaluating them in your time, in your need to have more time to reach your academic goals as part of your tenure and promotion package?
Yeah, so for maternity leave where I teach, you have the option of kind of hitting pause on your tenure clock. So that was an option that I was given to have an extra year. And with COVID and going remote for the teaching observations that we're supposed to have, now those are kind of getting pushed back and we don't really know until when, but I've been really fortunate to be part of a very supportive and understanding department, and just overall the school where I am is very supportive. So I don't want to hit pause on my tenure clock, and I still feel like I'm on track to being able to reach that within the 5 years, but I have that option if I need it.
Thank you, Lisa, for your answer. Now I have a question for Chris. So you mentioned that we have more funding opportunities and also we have more people applying. Does that mean that the process is in general more competitive? And what can you do to make your proposals to stand out?
Well, a very good question, I think, for all of us, huh? And I don't know. I mean, the number of applications is going in, but the funding rate is staying relatively steady, both in a lot of the philanthropic foundations and in many of the major national science foundations, although there's been a recent tick down. I think that it's what I'm seeing on panels in multiple countries are the proposals are getting better. And so even if the funding rates are maintaining constancy, and we can argue about this, it's certainly a competitive environment. And this is why I think it's very important to understand that you should not be upset. I mean, this goes for our journal articles too. We don't want to go into this. Don't be upset by rejection. Try to understand the constructive comments you receive and respond to them, and try to develop a thick skin on the other comments. To put them in, that's a reviewer's thing. I think you need to get those reviews. I think the most important thing I can suggest is submit proposals to as many places as possible and get comfortable with the idea that if you're going to do a project, just because you think it's only a theoretical project or a methods project to develop a DNA procedure, as Lina was just telling us, maybe you can cage that in a conservation message. And maybe sometimes a conservation project that you have or some other type of project, you can sell it in another way. And so I think if you take this trajectory wherein you understand the pieces that you want to fund and the breadth of opportunities available, you can always match some pieces there.
Thank you. That was perfect. Lina, the next question is for you, but I just wanted to read a few comments. First, there was a comment that I am identifying myself so much with your story. So I think a lot of people have that experience that you've had where they go in to get a PhD and they think that my only option now is to be a professor, and you've enlightened us and showed us that it's okay to change your mind, which is really important to remember. So kind of related to that, what aspects of your job do you enjoy the most? And in particular, what are things that you love doing that you particularly maybe wouldn't get for a career track in academia had you gone that route?
I think the thing that I enjoyed the most that I think I could get in academia, but it would depend on the type of academia job that I get. And I didn't share this in my presentation, but I did apply to a tenure track position on primate conservation, which I thought had everything that I wanted, and I realized it didn't, and I didn't get it, which I'm happy, because I was like, if I get it, what am I gonna do? But yeah, and why I'm saying that is because when I applied to that tenure track job, and I think we can hear that from Alysa and Chris, you don't have a lot of time to really do the human side component of your research. You have to apply to grants, you have to get your research going. And something that I like the most in my job is going into the field and exchanging ideas and conversations and friendships with the local community and with the indigenous communities that I work with. Because, and I didn't say that, but I did see a comment, conservation is not for those who have a PhD. Conservation is not for those who went to academia. Conservation is a super inclusive field where all voices should be heard. So getting into the field and spending months with the indigenous community and realizing that, you know, I might have a PhD in anthropology and biology, I really don't know anything. Like those experiences, getting to share and make a family in the field and getting to see that interaction and the problems firsthand, I don't think I could have had that in academia. Saying that, I miss my times in front of a computer where I could spend like a week solving a problem. I don't have time to do that anymore because the pressures are there and we need to solve them.
Thanks, Lina. I have now another question for Chris. So it is always difficult to get training in fundraising. So do you have any advice on how can we become more active in peer review groups, in funding committees, chapters of, in general?
I think it depends on your affiliation. I think one of the best, and maybe Natalia and Jen can speak to this, forums for this is to get involved through this group. And I think that there has been some work to set up networks for peer review of proposals and ideas. And I think to take advantage of those, I know that on social media, there are Facebook groups, perhaps within disciplines and others where people begin to share ideas and they peer review one another. And I think this is a very important, I'll underline this, a synergistic approach that it's not only you getting feedback on your ideas and proposal, but also you learn so much in providing feedback to others, not only in seeing how they're articulating their ideas and structuring their proposals, but also learning how to make constructive comments yourself. And in so doing, sometimes I have learned when you think you're being constructive, you also are being somewhat critical. And you can learn to phrase things in a way that we're really creating a supportive community. And that will start to erode this need for a thick skin, because rejection is bad enough, but rejection when comments are not phrased in the most constructive fashion can be very difficult for early career scientists.
And a quick follow-up for that. So do you have any resource in making proposals and pitching ideas?
I will turn that to you and Jen to talk about how Sexy is going to follow through on this. Huh?
Yeah, we can pick up on that. So to follow up on the question too of getting involved, we would love to have your involvement in Sexy. Please feel free to email Natalia or I. We have a lot of things that we're putting in place that we really hope are useful. Things like reviews for job applications, practice giving talks, reviews for grad school applications, helping to build networks of people who are in your same boat. If you would like to get involved with either helping to plan that or just to be a beneficiary of some of those, please feel free to email us. We would love to hear from you, and I will put our email in the chat so that you can reach out. And then we will go ahead and continue on with our questions. Please feel free to put more questions in the Q&A. Alysa, this one is for you. Can you give an example of how you modified your schedule when something came up, like perhaps your student meeting went over or something small altered your schedule? Did you sacrifice and delete something, or were you able to shift things around? Where did your priorities lie? Lisa, you're muted if you're there.
Oh, okay, sorry. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, these things do come up, and sometimes you're able to kind of program into your schedule like an extra pocket of 30 minutes here and there in case things do go over. But I feel like when you do end up kind of making those adjustments,
but you can still come by.
What you end up sacrificing is your writing time. So I would just really caution you to kind of be careful and protect your time. And I started setting timers for meetings that I had, and it would go off, or I would say, hey, I'm sorry, I have to, I would also do a lot of meetings sometimes that had the potential to run over before I would have to leave to go pick up my daughter from school. So there, there's really, I can't extend it. If you want, you can walk with me to my car. I would do that sometimes if we needed to go over a little, but I find that when you don't protect your time, what you sacrifice is your writing time.
Okay, great. We have one more question for Lina. What would be your best advice to approaching to communities who survive from extracting natural resources in an unsustainable way?
Yeah, I think in general, when working with communities, being indigenous, Afro-descent, or local communities, the way to start approaching is to build a relationship of trust and respect, and never forget that that's their home and you're just a guest, and respecting their ways of living and their values and who they are. So first step is to build that trust, and if you never build that trust, it's really hard. You might be able to engage with them, but you might not be able to do so in an effective way. I think once you have built that relationship of trust and friendship and honesty, it's hearing their voices, hearing, what's in stake for them. I think this is the case for every single group of people, is understanding what are their behaviors and attitudes, and just being a listener, getting there to understand what's happening, respecting their spaces and their timings. Different communities have different ways of living and different timings. So just respecting that and just getting to know them and understand what's in stake for them and what is important for them, and and this is hard, kind of leaving behind what you think has happened or what you think needs to be done, to really understand what they need and in what way they have been affected. But that, for me, trust and respect are the key.
You're muted, Natalia. There you go.
Yeah. And how competitive finding a job in conservation field just after your PhD?
It is competitive, and I have to say, I think I was really lucky. And I think if you hear different stories of how people ended up in conservation, everybody has a different story. At the beginning, I thought that my path was to expand my work with these silvery brown spider tamarin monkey, create my proper NGO and start fundraising. But people here know how difficult it is to fundraise and how streams of funding come in and out. And it's really hard at the beginning to have a career just on grants. And a lot of the grants at the beginning are just for research and they don't pay salaries. And once you have built and show success, then you can start applying to bigger pots of money where you can take money for your salary. So it is competitive, and you have to persevere, and you have to, and I think the same is in academia. People in academia struggle getting jobs because there's so many offer and little and so many little jobs. So it is competitive, but I think more and more conservation is opening, and I think more and more conservation is being inclusive, and it's not anymore that only if you have a PhD you can end up in an NGO. And I think that's what happened in the beginning. And in fact, some of the advice that people told me is like, finish your PhD or you won't get a job. And now being in this job, I realized that's not true. So it is competitive and it's not easy, but I think the key is to network, because a lot of the jobs are not published. My job wasn't advertised anywhere. My job was created for me. I basically I want to work with you, and they see like, okay, let's see where we can find a job. So don't wait for jobs to be published, because many jobs in conservation aren't published and it's just word of mouth, or you start with an internship or a consultancy or a part-time, and that evolves into a job. So my advice is, if you want a job in conservation, don't just look at the job postings, because that's a fraction of the jobs that are out there. And not everybody can afford an internship because some people have kids and family, but just chase. And I think Chris said multiple times, rejections are gonna come, and you just have to build a thick skin, because at the end someone will say yes.
Lina, a quick follow-up. Could you explain a little bit what are the components of research in your job? This person is interested in understanding how the research works within an NGO.
So it depends, and I am more on the programmatic side. So research informs my job, but I don't do research in my job. So GWC is an organization that our model is that we partner with organizations who do the work, and we just try to leverage support. So a lot of my job, I'm currently now working with amphibians, and I'm not trained as a herpetologist, and I don't do any research whatsoever. I do more strategic planning of what are the needs, what are the threats, how can we fundraise, and how can we get people to do conservation of the species. In my organization, there's a research team that it's identifying where the priorities are. And in this particular case they do a lot of IUC and red listing and identification of biodiversity hotspots. So they tell us, okay, these are the priorities. And then people that me on the programmatic side, we go and do the job on the ground. So research informs what I do on an everyday basis, but it's a different research that I don't think I was trained on my PhD. It's not, we have this big question, how do we solve it? But it's more like, we need to do this, we need to have adaptive management measures, and research informs that. So I don't know if it was clear, but it's not research in the sense that research, basically conservation informs my research. If we're working with the species and we don't know what's the threat, then we do camera trapping, see where it is, try to identify with communities what are the threats. That's the kind of research that I do. I don't know if that was clear. It's not an easy answer.
That was a great answer. Thank you so much, Lina. So Chris, the next question is for you. Someone is going ahead and implementing some of the ideas that many of you have talked about, which is go ahead and make connections. And so this question is, Chris, how do herbaria from South America connect with the FIU International Center for Tropical Botany to collaborate on new research projects? And what, if any, is your focus through the International Center for Tropical Botany on South American flora?
Let me unmute here. Wow, this is a little bit more a narrow breadth of response, I suppose, but I think I'll try to broaden it. I think that it has become important for us to have hubs, and unfortunately in the COVID challenge, those hubs don't exist. But I think throughout biodiversity science, whether it's supporting basic science or conservation, there's still a very strong foundation on being able to define and identify species and implement that work. And I think that creating international networks where museums and herbaria can participate in this has become very important. One of the things we're trying to establish here is a hub wherein we can actually help to support, and part of that is helping with fundraising and distribute, but also help to convene workshops wherein we can all work together, not only to coordinate approaches to implement species delimitation and species identification, but also to share in collaborative research proposal and manuscript writing. And unfortunately, COVID has given us this big challenge right now because, you know, Miami for me used to be a hotspot of biodiversity, and now she's a hotspot of COVID. I think that hopefully we'll work through this issue, and that places like this can be places where all of you are welcome to visit with us and to discuss these issues.
Here is a question for Alysa. Do you have any suggestions, comments, advice out focusing on accomplishing tasks versus spending a certain amount of time on the task? This is especially for writing, which is more a creative task. And sometimes it is better just to say, I'm going to work 2 hours instead of saying, I'm going to work 3 paragraphs.
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. I think it's definitely true. I still, just when you do have deadlines, or when you are creating deadlines for yourself, to make sure that, you know, you're getting your article submitted to the journal by a certain date. It is helpful kind of in your week by week plan to have a sense of, okay, well, I need to be at this point by this week so that I'm able to submit on time. And maybe that means, you know, if you have these 2 hours that you have to end up kind of scrapping everything that you did at that point, you might kind of have to go back and kind of, that would be one of those assess and adjust pieces, and say, okay, I'm going to need to kind of look through and see where I can add some extra time to work on this. So initially when I started the program, they had the whole, you know, write for 30 minutes a day. And I started that the first couple of weeks, and it was helpful just to kind of get back into that writing mode. But I really quickly saw that for what I wanted to accomplish, writing 30 minutes a day wasn't enough. So that's part of kind of that reflection and assessing and adjusting piece. Because it's true, you can't just say, okay, I have 45 minutes, and in these 45 minutes, I'm going to write the introduction, because that won't necessarily work out.
Perfect. I can definitely relate to that. I'll write an introduction today, and then I have like one sentence. Okay, Lina, this question is for you. To what extent do you think knowing the local communities in Colombia helped you to be a good asset for the GWC? Or what do you think made you stand out from others who were potential candidates for your position?
Yeah, I think, well, knowing the language and being from the country or the region definitely helps, because you understand the culture, how the communities operate, you know, the cultural sensibilities, you know, the government authorities. It definitely helps knowing specifically the language. It's really, I think nowadays conservation model has changed drastically, and it's not as colonialist as it used to be, and it's more inclusive. So it's not anymore that English speaker is sent into a country to do conservation. So knowing the language really helps, and knowing the reality really helps. As I said, there wasn't like a job opening for my position, so I didn't have to compete with anyone. I just had to convince them that I was gonna be useful. And I think in my experience and being able to then talk to the people that hire me, just being able to show my passion, to show what I wanted to do, and not just like my skill set, but just like my passion and my experiences really help. And I remember distinctly, at the time I didn't know that my organization and the CEO of my organization, it's okay, habitat loss is primarily caused by cattle ranching, and a lot of organization and conservation, it's including myself in the past, you know that, but you still eat meat and you still like love burgers. So I remember we were talking about it, and I was telling them how in my PhD I would like fight with cattle ranchers, and how like I would like spend hours talking to cattle ranchers. And I think that personal experience, it's what cultivated him, and he was like, I like you. So I think sharing your experiences and just show your passion and why you are doing this, because academia as well as conservation, it's not easy. So you have to show that you're resilient and that you're gonna work hard. So yeah, just being honest and having really good communication skills. Like I think in academia, sometimes we don't have to have great communication skills because we are all in our research doing our little things, but being friendly, being open, being honest really help. And yeah, definitely speaking the language.
Then one follow-up comment that was made, you had mentioned the student conference on conservation science, and one of our listeners actually said that when it's held in Cambridge, they have travel and internship grants to help people from developing countries attend. So please utilize that resource, and I'm sure Lina could actually be another resource for that if anyone
and if I'm not wrong, it's I think in Cambridge and somewhere else in India maybe, but I think it's in different continents, so that people from different countries can attend, and they have different fellowships and careers. And also WWF has fellowship and scholarships for people who want to attend conferences. So yes, I just said US because I'm in the US, but it's in Cambridge too.
Thanks, Lina. Now we have another question for Chris. So when we submit proposals, sometimes we get some feedbacks, and those are really helpful, but sometimes we don't. So in that case, what do we do? How do we know how bad or how good were our proposals and how we can enhance them?
Wow, that's a very good question and unfortunate, and I empathize. I think there are some funding agencies that provide very comprehensive reviews of proposals. Some of them are very well standardized to a rubric, and it's a very transparent process. And others, you're just informed, sometimes belatedly, of these decisions. And I think here it's a very difficult process to go through. I think it's okay in many cases to reach back out and contact the program officers involved. But one of the lessons I would say is be very careful in your language, be very respectful, and don't let any of the hurt of rejection influence the way you articulate your questions. Because subtly sometimes in our language, we can introduce this disappointment. And I think it's very important to remain positive and respectful in any of these inquiries. And that goes for when you write editors for journals as well. And sometimes you'll get a response, and sometimes you won't, and you might have to accept that. I would say a second response to this is to look through those proposals that are funded and try to ask yourself what might be the contrast between what you've put together and what they've put together. But most often, even when you don't get feedback, if you are persistent in contacting a program officer respectfully, you will ultimately get some sort of response.
Good to know. Thank you, Chris. Okay, so this question is for Alysa. Sometimes despite pressure and even a deadline, it's very difficult to push yourself to write. So can you give some efficient advice? For example, how would you avoid procrastination and how would you make progress?
That's a great question. I started putting together kind of this write on site group at Wofford, so with other colleagues. So that's kind of a way, if you're writing with other colleagues and you kind of know, okay, this is the time we're going to get together, we're gonna sit down. That can be sort of helpful. Changing spaces. So I had to kind of move from writing in my house, which I thought it was great. I have this time to write at home, but I found that I just do better when I'm writing at a coffee shop or even writing on campus. I feel like people are observing me and it puts the pressure on to write and to not do other things on my computer. So I think that having a group, and that support group that I told you guys about from the Faculty Success Program was also really helpful. So when you do kind of have a bad week and you say, hey, this week I was just really blocked, I wasn't able to do anything, kind of getting some strategies and talking through what you might do and maybe setting kind of a more basic goal for yourself for that week and say, okay, well, this week my writing goal is going to be this. So making an adjustment to what you'd originally envisioned to get yourself into that mode.
Thanks. And now we have our last question to Lina. When students or early career scientists are thinking out their future career, what are the key questions they should be asking themselves?
That's a tough question. I think most importantly, what is driving your passion? And I think most of the time that will give you the answer. I think, and I think this is not a question that you ask yourself, but I think I reiterate this so many times. It's okay to change plans and don't feel bad. And no one does a PhD just to be in academia, or no one does A to do A. So I think ask yourself, am I happy? And is this what I want to do? And is this how I think I'm helping the world? And meaning helping the world, is this what I think it's my mission or where I see myself going? I think that, and then once you have that answer, you can start figuring out, yes, okay, this is where I'm going, or no, what can I do? But yeah, where do you see yourself and what brings you happiness? And where is your passion? It's a little bit abstract and wishy-washy, but I think that's what I think people should ask.
That's great. Those are some really reflective questions to think about. So that concludes our Q&A. Those are all of our questions. If you do have further questions for our speakers, their emails are in the chat, so please feel free to reach out to any of them or to myself or Natalia with further questions. We're happy to follow up with anything that you may need. I want to extend our deepest gratitude to Alysa, Chris, and Lina for joining us today. These talks have been absolutely phenomenal, incredibly helpful, and definitely something for many people to think about. Okay, so just to remind you that this is the second webinar of the ATBC's 2020 webinar series. We have more webinars coming up in the next month, and you can find all of that information and register for those webinars on the ATBC webpage, which is linked in the chat box. And I'll just say one more time that if you're interested in being more involved with ATBC, especially the Student and Early Career Scientist Committee, please send either Natalia or myself an email. Our emails, again, are pasted in the chat box. We would love to hear from you. Please stay tuned to our Facebook page, our website, and Twitter, as we have a lot more activities coming up. So thank you again for your participation, and we look forward to seeing you all in the upcoming webinars.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.